So let's talk, this is going to be lesson 23, which are all kinds of techniques that I've used to help people learn how to cast better. So I'm just going to kind of list them. I've demonstrated many of them. The ones I haven't, I'll try to do with a noodle. But these are things that I think can make a huge difference, and there's a lot of them. These are what people refer to as the tools in their tool chest. And I want to make it pretty clear that if you're starting with a beginning caster, and you've created, let's say, the roll cast, and they're making 5 errors in it, then you haven't done a very good job of teaching. Teaching requires that we teach step 1, and they can do it. Then we teach 1 and add 2, and they can do it. Then they teach 2, 1, 2, and 3, and add 3, and do it. So that as you build the sequence, there are very few errors in the sequence. It's like building a car. You don't build a whole car and then check it to make sure that the frame is okay. You check the frame to start with. So oftentimes, if you get a student who's already been casting for a long time and their casts aren't very good, you need to go all the way back to basic drills. You need to go back to the paintbrush drill. You need to go back to the line drill. You need to go back to the pickup and lay down, to just plain false casting, the tip drills, all the drills and exercises in chapter 1, because it's going to be a waste of time going back and trying to change things when the fundamentals are just messed up. The fundamental base level of competency has to be there, or all the other stuff falls apart. So my suggestion is don't just assume that all these tools are going to work for you. The other thing I think that's really important is there can be 2 different people that use, let's say, a lathe. The quality of the product they produce off of that lathe, it's the same tool. So the noodle is the same exact tool for every single person. There's a noodle. It's a noodle. That's all there is to it. It's a tool. How I use that tool is going to be really critical. How do I fit it in? So one of the things we want to do, no matter how we use all of these tools, is we have to understand that we need to find, let's say a person's doing this. They're making 3 errors simultaneously. They're making an error, they're just going, they're too fast, there's no proper acceleration. They got way too big a casting arc, let's assume they have 40 feet of line, and they've got no pause. So what do? You need to ask yourself, what's the most fundamental error here? So I'm going to give you a second to think about it. What would you have them do? I'll tell you right now, if you told them, hey, you're going to try to correct all those things at the same time, you're done. There's no way. You're going to have to pick which one of those 3 classic errors are they making that's the most important. I've had people tell me, oh, I would make them close down their casting arc. Okay, so they do this. You think that's going to help? That line is just wrapped around their line. The one you have to stop is a pause. If you get the pause first, now whichever the other 2 you want to work on is probably okay. But you've got to figure out the pause is the critical one. If you correct the pause problem, a lot of the rest of it's going to be easy to teach. If you try to correct it all, you're pretty much hosed. So that's one thing. The other thing is praise, prompt, and leave. Once they get this done, praise. Hey man, now you got a great pause, really good pause. And when they're doing this, I would just tell them, let's work on it. We need to pause a little longer. Let's pause a little longer. So when you get to here, I want you to stop and count to 1. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, before you come forward, or hi mom, or whatever. Then what you can do is when they get to that, you say, okay, you got the pause really down, the praise. The prompt is next, prompt. Now what I'd like you to do, I'm going to put 2 noodles up here. I want you to stop here. Still say 1 when you hit it. Stop. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Now the last thing I'm going to have you do is try to calm down a little bit. You're done. Pause is awesome. Casting arc is perfect. Now what we want to do is just relax and make a nice smooth cast, nice smooth acceleration. So before we do that, let's go do the paintbrush drill. Just this, or let's just do some pantomiming. And when I pantomime, it's normally with my hand first, then a noodle, then a rod without a line, and then a rod and a line. So that's what we're going to try to do. Now, so the system that you use, the understanding of how to use these tools, in what order to use them and when to use them, is absolutely critical. You can't just pick a tool out of a box and use it. If it's the wrong tool for that particular application, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. So now we're going to talk about some of the tools, but you need to really go through, I would suggest that everybody make sure you're going through the teaching stuff and understanding how the tools are applied to different situations. There's one other aside really quickly. Anybody who believes that there are tactile learners, visual learners, and auditory learners, and as a teacher, you need to be aware of that, I'm sorry, but that's just flat not true. There's tons and tons of studies that dispel that whole myth. That's just like the watermelon diet or something. The truth is we need to do all three things simultaneously. If I'm going to have somebody, what I'm going to do, let's say I go to put my hand on their hand, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, I want you to close your eyes and feel this. Now I want you to look where my rod's stopping. Tactile, visual, and obviously they're listening at the same time, so it's auditory. The only way to teach efficiently is to use all three modalities simultaneously, or in very close proximity to each other. It's a total waste of time, especially with a group, to decide, well, this person is a visual learner, that person's auditory learner. That's just total, it just doesn't work. And it's not going to be, it hasn't been supported by any kind of research. So the best thing is what I call say, see, do teaching. Say it, have them see it, and have them do it, and then all three of them simultaneously, or the closer to simultaneous you can get, the better. That way everybody learns. So think about that when you're trying to teach. So let's talk about some of the tools. Eyes closed. I'm telling you, I use eyes closed all the time. The senses, we don't tend to pay attention to the tactile and visual senses when our eyes are open. If we close our eyes, we feel stuff. It forces us to feel and to visualize. So by having people close their eyes, almost any drill, the line drill, the pick up and lay down, all those drills with the eyes closed, they may not be quite as good, and oftentimes you'd be surprised the drill actually gets better with their eyes closed because they're not distracted by the line and everything else. They're actually visualizing where they stop and when they start and so on. So a lot of times I use an eyes closed thing. Pantomiming, like we just talked about, hand first, then the noodle, then the rod without a line, and then the rod and the line. That's very important. The simulcasting, both people cast together. Super skill for a teacher. And it's kind of fun. It looks really good. If you ever videotape it, it looks awesome. Teach me, okay? I've just showed you the 6 steps of the roll cast. What I'd like you to do now, show me the 6 steps of the roll cast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's an awesome way. There's that old saying that the best way to learn something is teach it is actually been proved by study after study after study. Research completely supports the idea. So even if you're teaching one-on-one, have your student teach you after you've taught them. Always use visual cues when you're talking about tactile stuff. It does no good to tell a person, close your casting arc. There are some people that can do that. But if you tell them, here's a visual clue. That is the back when you hit that palm tree. This is the front when you hit that oak tree. Or you even use the clock. There's some kind of a visual imprint in their mind. 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and so on. So we want you to close your piece of pie. Always use analogies and try to use visual cues for what you want them to do. It doesn't do any good for most people for you to say, you need to close your casting arc. That's pretty much a worthless thing for most learners. Not everybody, but most people. So we take credit for the person that can learn that way and say, well, I can teach somebody. Yeah, I can teach. There's a lot of people I've taught in my career that my grandmother could have taught. It doesn't mean that I was teaching well. It was mean that they were just brilliant students. So try to get over that. Left-handed. Oftentimes a person who's having trouble right-handed, have them try a little bit left-handed. They've done a lot of studies, or simulcast together. They do it together. Right hand and left hand together. That's an awesome thing to do. Hey, give them 2 rods. They don't have to have lines on them. Give them 2 rods and have them do this. They've done a lot of studies that working with your left hand improves your right hand. So try that. Let's talk about a hand on top of a hand for a second. one of the things I found is that it's a waste of time to take a rod out of a student's hand. I mean, I virtually never take a rod out of a student's hand. Explaining and demonstrating. Here, let me have that and explain and demonstrate how to do it. That, except for 5 to 10% of the population, is as worthless as a screen door on a submarine, man. Just forget it. It's not going to work. So I never take the rod out of the hand. The next best thing, and there's some disagreement about this, but if Chris is here, I would come up to Chris and say, Chris, do you mind if I put my hand on top of yours?
No, that's fine.
Okay, and I'll be standing behind you. Is that all right?
All right, sure.
So first off, could you move your hand back just a little bit as far as you can so I have some room up here?
Okay.
I don't have to really grab your hand. So you're standing way out in front of them. I've never had a problem, and I've had a lot of secret evaluations at the end of workshops, and I ask them, is there anything I've done that's bothered you? And I've never had one single person out of probably a couple of thousand at least say, yeah, it really bothered me when you touched my hand. I've never had anybody say no. If you're a professional and you're not a horn dog and you're doing this the way you're supposed to do, I don't see any problem at all. You know, it's just, I'm sorry, and that person should tell me if they have a problem. This is the most effective way to get them to feel what's going on. So what I do is I do this, then I come around, stay away from them. Don't touch them, don't grab them, don't touch them. Stay right here. Okay, Chris, I'm gonna put my hand right, this little finger is kind of gonna be over your thumb, and I'm gonna be right here. Now what I want you to do, I want you to close your eyes, and I just want you to feel, let me do 100% of the work. Now we're going to go back and forth and do whatever we're supposed to be doing. Back and forth. We got a tree up there, so it's not good, but there we go. So back and forth. You feel that?
I do. Okay,
now what I want you to do, I want you to do 10% of it. Try to do it the same rhythm I just did it. Okay, now do 30% of it. Keep your eyes closed. Do 40% of it. Okay, do 75% of it. Okay, now you take control of it. Okay, good. All right? Very good. Okay, now open your eyes and watch what's happening. Let me do it again. Okay, now you take 10% of it, 20% of it, 30% of it. Okay, very good. So when Chris does that, I'm completely away from him. I've got just a couple of my little fingers over his thumb. The rest of me, it could even be up on the rod a little bit. I like down here a little better because that's more realistic. He can feel the leverage. When you start casting a rod up here, you're casting an 8-foot rod instead of a 9-foot rod, and things are a little bit different. Plus, he can't feel the pressure I'm putting on his hand. He can sort of feel the pressure I'm putting on the rod as I make the cast. In any case, I think that's a very valuable teaching technique. I use it all the time, and it beats the crud out of taking somebody's rod from them and telling them, hey, let me show you how to do this. When I see a teacher do that, I mean, I'm pretty unimpressed. Another technique that I use a lot is just what I call the exaggeration technique. Let's say a person's using a wrist, too much wrist. I'll tell them, hey, what I want you to do, I want you to use even more wrist. Really use some wrist. Come on, man, more wrist, more wrist. Okay, less wrist, less wrist, less wrist, less wrist, less wrist. Oftentimes you can get somebody to improve by just exaggerating their fault and then moving backwards from there. So that's something you can try. Plus, a lot of these things is the more different kinds of things you're trying, the more fun a 1-hour lesson can be, especially if you're working with somebody for let's say 1 day a week or 1 hour a week for 6 weeks in a row or something like that. Man, you don't want to do the same old thing every single time. You want to mix some stuff to make it a little more fun. So mix some of these different techniques up. The other thing is eyes closed and visualize the clock. I'll tell somebody, close your eyes. So I've got my eyes closed. Tell me 12. 1, 2, 3, 12, 11, 10, 9, 2, 9, 3, 11, 2, and just see if they can do that. Now have them close their eyes and cast. Cast. Okay, I want you to make big loops. You're gonna have to go from 2:30 to 9:30. Okay? Smaller loops, go from 10 to 2. Smaller loops, 1:30 to 12:30. You better have a small amount of line or you're gonna get a bunch of tails. But my point is, you can have them do that kind of stuff with their eyes closed. Have them challenge the visual like this. What I want you to do is do vertical, okay? 45 degrees. Horizontal. Vertical. Have them do that. Now I want you to do it off the off shoulder. Pretty vertical. 45 degrees. Horizontal. Just have them do that. Practice that kind of stuff. Grip. You know, as far as style is concerned, there are some styles that lend themselves better to certain applications than others. So when people say, oh, style doesn't matter, that's not really true. Style does matter in some cases. This grip is not a particularly good, you don't see too many people casting a 12 weight at 80 feet for tarpon with this grip. They just don't have enough strength in his forefinger to stop the rod properly to make a good cast. So this grip or this grip are going to be superior. But like we talked about in task number 22, sometimes changing this grip for accuracy is good. It's also good because it's hard. I can't break my wrist to here. I can break my wrist pretty easy down to here. Here it's much more difficult. So the grip, sometimes you can change a person's style. Same thing with their stance. So let's talk a little bit about style. Let's talk about stance as a style. I'm going to give you, Joe Mahler taught me something for the double haul that I really, really like. What normally most people that are right-handed stand like this is called an open stance. This would be a square stance, and this would be a closed stance or a sugarfoot stance or whatever. Anyway, so most people are here. So when they go to haul, this leg is kind of in the way to make a nice parallel haul with their rod. If you stand here and haul, now you get the idea, instead of hauling out, you get the idea of hauling down, but with this leg being down. I do that as a warm-up a lot of times when I go to start my practice for double hauling and distance casting, because it forces me to start thinking about this instead of this, which decreases the efficiency of my cast. So now I'm going to work on here. So that's good. The other thing is, this is a great stance. The problem is, oftentimes the person who has this stance in the right hand, what do? They have a tracking error when they come around, which is maybe what they want. So sometimes if you're doing a tension cast, but still, you may want to have them do this. It's pretty hard to have a tracking error right here. Much more difficult to have a tracking error. So you can play with a stance as a way of solving some problems. So when you're looking at a person and you're watching their casting problems, think about the possibility, can I change their style a little bit to help them, to make their casting more efficient and easier? Same thing with arm way up here. Sure, you can cast up here, but for some people, this is going to keep everything straighter and cleaner. So those are all things you can do to help a person become a better caster. So let's just review a little bit. One of the things I really think that helps is don't have the person do the grass drill for 20 minutes. If they don't get something in the first 3 or 4 minutes, they're not going to get it in that particular learning sequence. You need to go do something else and come back to it. The other day I had a guy who was learning how to double haul, and he was okay, he was pretty rough, but then we went off and did some pickup and lay down and some more false casting. We shot at some targets. 20 minutes later we came back and did the double haul drill again. Bam, he got much better at it. We went off and did it again for 20 minutes. The last 5 minutes, he was double hauling 50 feet of line. If I'd have just kept hanging with the double haul, A, he was getting frustrated, B, he was getting tired, C, he wasn't going to learn it. He needed to have a break. So that's something that's really important, is don't work at something too long before you shift a little bit. Use your imagination. Realize that it just, look at a person's problem. Don't try to solve just what we look at as a symptom of the problem. In other words, let's say you've got a person who's got a downward trajectory in the front, and that therefore they can't cast very far. That's the symptom of very likely creep or an inappropriate application of power in the back. So what they've done is, instead of having a casting arc like this, they've created a casting arc like this to compensate for that. This is not good. You try to solve that, you're not solving anything. If you all of a sudden, without correcting the fundamental issue, which is the creep or the inappropriate application of power, and you get them to start doing this, what's going to happen? They're going to have tails all day long. You've got to find the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is in the backstroke with the creep or the inappropriate application of power. So don't treat the symptoms. Ask yourself, okay, this is the symptom, this is what I see, but what's the fundamental root cause of that issue? And then go all the way back to it and treat it. So those are things that I think are pretty important. And I think if you use these kinds of techniques and you go through this teaching stuff, you're going to become a much better teacher. You're going to enjoy teaching more, and so are your students, because it's going to be interesting and fun, and it's going to be different every day.